Chapter 1 of Travels in Brazil, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Travels in Brazil, Volume 1, by Henry Koster. Chapter 1. Departure from Liverpool. Arrival at Pernambuco, the town and harbor of Recife, the governor, the trade. If my health had not required a change of climate, I should not perhaps so soon have accomplished the wish I had often expressed of leaving England for a short time. An immediate removal was judged expedient, and as the ports of Spain and Portugal were either closed to British subjects, or at least not in a state to be visited by an invalid, I determined upon Brazil, to which my friends agreed. I fixed on Pernambuco, because a gentleman, who had for many years been acquainted with my family, was about to embark for that place, and from the favorable reports of the people and climate which I had received from several persons. On the 2nd of November, 1809, I sailed from Liverpool in the ship Lucy. We had a very prosperous passage of 35 days, without any occurrence worthy of particular notice. I was agreeably awakened very early on the morning of the 7th of December with the news that we were in sight of land, and likely to get into harbor this day. We soon discovered 2 vessels, with all sails set, making for us. These proved to be 2 English merchant ships, bound likewise to Pernambuco. They had never before been at this port, and therefore wished to receive some information respecting it. They judged that, from the manner in which our vessel made for the land, her commander must be acquainted with it, which was the case, this being the second voyage of the Lucy to Pernambuco. The land is low, and consequently not to be seen at any considerable distance, but as we approached it, we distinguished the hill upon which stands the city of Olinda, a little to the northward, and some leagues to the southward, the Cape of St. Augustinho. A nearer view discovered to us the town of St. Antonio do Recife, almost ahead, with the shipping in front of it. The dreary land between it and Olinda, which is 1 league distant, and cocoa groves northward, as far as the eye can reach, which is 1 league distant, and cocoa groves northward, as far as the eye can reach. Southward of the town are also seen great numbers of cocoa trees, woods, and scattered cottages. The situation of Olinda is the highest in the neighborhood, and though not very high, is still not despicable. Its appearance from the sea is most delightful. Its whitewashed churches and convents upon the tops and sides of the hill, its gardens and trees, interspersed among the houses, afford a promise of great extent, and hold out expectations of great beauty. The sands, which extend 1 league to the southward of it, are relieved by 2 fortresses erected upon them, and by the ships in the lower harbor. Then follows the town of Recife, with the appearance of being built in the water, so low is the sandbank upon which it has been raised. The shipping immediately in front partly conceal it, and the bold reef of rocks on the outside of these, with the surf dashing violently against and over it, give to them the appearance of being a shore, and as no outlet is seen, they seem to be hemmed in. The small tower or fort at the northern end of the reef, however, soon claims attention, and points out the entrance. We approached the land rather to the southward of the town, and coasted under very easy sail, at a short distance from the reef, waiting for a pilot. It was not yet noon, the sea was smooth, the sun was bright, and everything looked pleasant. The buildings are all whitewashed, and sun shone upon them and gave to them a glittering silvery appearance. Nothing this day created so much astonishment on board our ship, amongst those who had not been before upon this coast, as the jangatas, sailing about in all directions. These are simply rafts of 6 logs of a peculiar species of light timber, lashed or pinned together, a large lateen sail, a paddle used as a rudder, a sliding keel let down between the 2 center logs, a seat for the steersman, and a long forked pole, upon which is hung the vessel containing water, the provisions, etc. These rude floats have a most singular appearance at sea, no hull being apparent even when near them. They are usually managed by 2 men, and go closer to the wind than any description of vessel. A large rowboat at last made its appearance, doubling the end of the reef near the small fort, which was declared to be that which brings off the pilots. The patron mor, harbour master, in his naval uniform, likewise came on board. A large launch followed the pilot, manned chiefly by negroes, almost naked. The colour of these men, the state in which they were, their noise and bustle, when certainly there was no occasion for it, and their awkwardness, were to me all new. This very first communication with the shore gave me an idea, for the moment, that the manners of the country at which I had arrived were still more strange than they actually proved to be. These visitors were followed by others of a very different description. 2 boats came alongside, manned by Englishmen, and conveying several English gentlemen. The former belonged to British ships loading in the harbour, and the latter were young men who had come out to Pernambuco to settle as merchants. The pilot placed himself near to the ship's windlass. A Portuguese sailor was sent to take the helm, but still the vociferation was extreme. The man seemed to think that by speaking very loudly he would make the English seamen understand his language, and what with his bawling to them and to his own people and their noise, the confusion was excessive. However, we doubled the fort in safety, and came to anchor in the upper harbour. The reef is very perpendicular near the bar, and to one unacquainted with the port, there is every appearance of the vessel being about to drive upon it. I then accompanied my fellow passenger. We left the ship and proceeded to the shore. Here was a new scene indeed. We had taken the letter bag with us. The crowd of well-dressed persons upon the quay was great. They saw the bag, and soon their anxiety for news overcame their politeness. The letters were asked for, and at last we gave them up, and they were scrambled for, each man seeking his own. We had landed at the custom-house wharf upon a busy day, and the negroes, too, were all clamour and bustle. Their hideous noise when carrying any load, bawling out some ditty of their own language, or some distich of vulgar Portuguese rhyme. The numerous questions asked by many persons who met us, and the very circumstance of seeing a population consisting chiefly of individuals of a dark colour, added to the sound of a new language, with which, although I was acquainted, still I had not since very early youth been in a country where it was generally spoken. All combined to perplex and to confuse. I was led along by those who were accustomed to these scenes. We proceeded to the house of one of the first merchants in the place. We were ushered up one pair of stairs into a room in which were several piles of piece goods, a table covered with papers, and several chairs. There were 4 or 5 persons in the room, besides the owner of the house. I delivered my letter of introduction to him, and was treated with the greatest civility. Our next visit was to a colonel, who was also a merchant, from whom I met with the same behaviour. As there are no inns or furnished lodgings at Recife or at Olinda. A house answering both these purposes has lately been established at Recife by an Irishman and his wife, 1815. An acquaintance of my fellow passenger obtained some temporary rooms for us, and supplied us with what we wanted. We are therefore at last quietly settled in our new habitation, if I may be allowed to call it quiet, while some 20 black women are under the window bawling out, in almost all tones and keys of which the human voice is capable, oranges, bananas, sweetmeats, and other commodities for sale. The town of St. Antonio do Recife, commonly called Pernambuco, though the latter is properly the name of the captaincy, consists of 3 compartments, connected by 2 bridges. A narrow, long neck of sand stretches from the foot of the hill, upon which Olinda is situated, to the southward. The southern extremity of this bank expands and forms the side of that part of the town particularly called Recife, as being immediately within the reef. There is another sandbank also of considerable extent, upon which has been built the second division, called Sant Antonio. Connect it with that already mentioned by means of a bridge. Yet a third division of the town remains to be mentioned, called Boa Vista, which stands upon the mainland to the southward of the other two, and is joined to them also by a bridge. The Recife, or reef of rocks already spoken of, runs in front of these sandbanks, and receives upon it the principal force of the sea, which at the flow of the tide rolls over it, but is much checked by it, and strikes the quays and buildings of the town with diminished strength. The greatest part of the extent of sand between Olinda and the town which remains uncovered is open to the sea, and the surf there is very violent. Buildings have only been raised within the protection of the reef. The tide enters between the bridges and encircles the middle compartment. On the land side there is a considerable expanse of water, having much the appearance of a lake, which becomes narrower towards Olinda, and reaches to the very streets of that place, thus facilitating the communication between the two towns. The view from the houses that look on to these waters is very extensive and very beautiful. Their opposite banks are covered with trees and whitewashed cottages, varied by small open spaces and lofty cocoa trees. The first division of the town is composed of brick houses of 3, 4, and even 5 stories in height. Most of the streets are narrow, and some of the older houses in the minor streets are only of 1 story in height, and many of them consist only of the ground floor. The streets of this part, with the exception of one, are paved. In the square are the custom house in one corner, a long, low, and shabby building, the sugar inspection, which bears the appearance of a dwelling house, a large church, not finished, a coffee house, in which the merchants assemble to transact their commercial affairs, and dwelling houses. There are 2 churches in use, one of which is built over the stone archway leading from the town to Olinda, at which a lieutenant's guard is stationed. The other church belongs to the priests of the Congregação da Madre de Deus. Near to the gateway above mentioned is a small fort, close to the waterside which commands it. To the northward is the residence of the port admiral, with the government timber yards attached to it. These are small, and the work going on in them is very trifling. The cotton market, warehouses, and presses are also in this part of the town. Footnote: it is perhaps not generally known that the bags of cotton are compressed by means of machinery into a small compass and fastened round with ropes, that the ships which convey them may contain a great number. End footnote. The bridge which leads to St. Antonio has an archway at either end, with a small chapel built upon each, and at the northern arch is stationed a sergeant's guard of 6 or 8 men. The bridge is formed in part of stone arches, and in part of wood. It is quite flat, and lined with small shops, which render it so narrow that 2 carriages cannot pass each other upon it. St. Antonio, or the middle town, is composed chiefly of large houses and broad streets, and if these buildings had about them any beauty, there would exist here a certain degree of grandeur. But they are too lofty for their breadth, and the ground floors are appropriated to shops, warehouses, stables, and other purposes of a like nature. The shops are without windows, and the only light they have is admitted from the door. There exists as yet very little distinction of trades, thus all descriptions of manufactured goods are sold by the same person. Some of the minor streets consist of low and shabby houses. Here are the governor's palace, which was in other times the Jesuits' convent, the town hall and prison, the barracks, which are very bad, the Franciscan, Carmelite, and Peña convents, and several churches, the interiors of which are very handsomely ornamented, but very little plan has been preserved in the architecture of the buildings themselves. It comprises several squares, and has, to a certain degree, a gay and lively appearance. This is the principal division of the town. The bridge which connects St. Antonio with Boa Vista is constructed entirely of wood, and has upon it no shops, but it is likewise narrow. The principal street of Boa Vista, which was formerly a piece of ground overflowed at high water, is broad and handsome. The rest of this third division consists chiefly of small houses, and as there is plenty of room here, it extends to some distance in a straggling manner. Neither the streets of this part of the town nor of St. Antonio are paved. A long embankment has likewise been made, which connects the sandbank and town of St. Antonio with the mainland at Afogados. Footnote: I did not discover any vestiges of the fort which stood here at the time of the Dutch War. End footnote. To the south and west of Boa Vista. The river Capibaribe, so famous in Pernambuco history, discharges its waters into the channel between St. Antonio and Boa Vista, after having run for some distance in a course nearly east and west. Some few of the windows of the houses are glazed and have iron balconies, but the major part are without glass, and of these balconies are enclosed by lattice work. And no females are to be seen, excepting the negro slaves, which gives a very somber look to the streets. The Portuguese. Footnote: I shall use this word exclusively when speaking of Europeans of this nation, and the word Brazilian when speaking of white persons born in Brazil. End footnote. The Brazilian and even the mulatto women in the middle ranks of life do not move out of doors in the daytime. They hear Mass at the churches before daylight, and do not again stir out, excepting in sedan chairs, or in the evening on foot, when occasionally a whole family will sally forth to take a walk. The upper harbor of Recife, called the Mosqueiro, as has been already said, is formed by the reef of rocks which run parallel with the town at a very small distance. The lower harbor, for vessels of 400 tons and upwards, called the Poço, is very dangerous, and it is open to the sea, and the beach opposite to it is very steep. The large Brazil ships, belonging to merchants of the place, lie here for months at a time, moored with 4 cables, 2 ahead and 2 astern. If precautions are not taken very speedily, the entrance to the harbor of Mosqueiro will become choked up owing to a breach in the reef, immediately within the small fort, which is called Picam. The port has 2 entrances, one of which is deeper than the other. The tide does not rise more than 5½ feet. The principal defense of the town consists in the forts do Buraco. Footnote: this is the name by which the fort is usually distinguished, but I rather think that it is not its proper appellation. End footnote. And Dobrum, both of which are built of stone, and are situated upon the sands opposite to the 2 entrances. Likewise there is the small fort of Bom Jesus, near to the archway and church of the same name. And upon the southeast point of the sandbank of St. Antonio stands the large stone fort of Cinco Pontas, so called from its pentagonal form. They are said to be all out of order. From what I have stated, it will be seen that the ground upon which the town has been built is most peculiarly circumstanced, and that the manner in which the harbor is formed is equally rare. The town is principally supplied with water, which is brought in canoes either from Olinda or from the river Capibaribe above the influence of the tide. It comes in bulk, and although the greater part of the vessels are decked, still it is usually filthy, as too much care is not taken in their cleanliness. The wells that are sunk in the sand upon which the town stands only affords brackish water. The 3 compartments of the town, together, contain about 25,000 inhabitants or more, and it is increasing rapidly. New houses are building wherever space can be found. The population consists of white persons, of mulatto and black free people, and of slaves also, of several shades. The reef of rocks, of which I have before spoken, continues along the whole coast between Pernambuco and Maranhão, and in some parts it runs at a very short distance from the shore, and in this case is usually high, remaining uncovered at low water, as at Recife, but in other places it recedes from the land, and is then generally concealed. It has numberless breaks in it, through which the communication with the sea is laid open. Recife is a thriving place, increasing daily in opulence and importance. The prosperity which it enjoys may be in some measure attributed to the character of its governor and captain general, Caetano Pinto de Miranda Montenegro, who has ruled the province for the last 10 years with systematic steadiness and uniform prudence. He has made no unnecessary innovations, but he has allowed useful improvements to be introduced. He has not, with hurried enthusiastic zeal, which often defeats its end, pushed forwards any novelty that struck him at the moment, but he has given his consent and countenance to any proposal backed by respectable persons. He has not interfered and intermeddled with those concerns in which governments have no business, but he has supported them when they have been once established. I here speak of commercial regulations and minor improvements in the chief town, and in the smaller settlements of the country. He is affable and hears the complaint of a peasant or a rich merchant with the same patience. He is just, seldom exercising the power which he possesses of punishing without appeal to the civil magistrate, and when he does enforce it, the crime must be very glaring indeed. He acts upon a system and from principle, and if it is the fate of Brazil to be in the hands of a despotic government, happy, compared to its present state, would it in general be if all its rulers resembled him. I love the place at which I so long resided, and I hope most sincerely that he may not be removed, but that he may continue to dispense to that extensive region the blessings of a mild, forbearing administration. In political consequence, with reference to the Portuguese government, Pernambuco holds the third. Footnote: I am not quite certain whether it is the third or fourth. End footnote. Rank amongst the provinces of Brazil. But in a commercial point of view, with reference to Great Britain, I know not whether it should not be named first. Footnote: I sailed from Pernambuco in the very last convoy of 1815, previous to the peace with the United States, which consisted of 28 vessels, viz., 2 ships of war, 2 prizes to them, and 24 merchant vessels, 14 of which were from Pernambuco, and the remaining 10 from Rio de Janeiro and Bahia. End footnote. Its chief exports are cotton and sugar. The former mostly comes to England, and may be accounted at 80,000 or 90,000 bags annually, averaging 160 pounds weight each bag. The latter is chiefly shipped to Lisbon. Hides, coconuts, ipecacuanha, and a few other drugs are also occasionally sent from thence, but are exported in trifling quantities. These articles are exchanged for manufactured goods, earthenware, porter, and other articles of necessity among civilized people, and also of luxury to no very great amount. 2 or 3 ships sail annually for Goa and the East Indies, and the trade to the coast of Africa for slaves is considerable. Several vessels from the United States arrive at Recife annually, bringing flour, of which great quantities are now consumed, furniture for dwelling houses, and other kinds of lumber, and carrying away sugar, molasses, and rum. During the late war between the United States and England, which interrupted this trade, Recife was at first somewhat distressed for wheat flour, but a supply arrived from Rio Grande do Sul, the most southern province of the Kingdom of Brazil. Footnote: an edict has lately been issued at Rio de Janeiro by the Regent, declaring himself the Prince Regent of the United Kingdoms of Portugal, Brazil, and the 2 Algarves, 1816. End footnote. The quality is good. Footnote: I saw in the year 1814 a very fine root of wheat that had been raised in the Campina Grande of the province of Paraíba, about 30 leagues to the northward of Recife. End footnote. And I rather think that some coasting vessels will continue to supply the market with this article, notwithstanding the renewed communication with North America. End of Chapter 1.